I'm Wade Rosen, the CEO of Atari. Thanks for having me.
So Wade, the first thing I want to ask you, because I think it's an important question, is what does a CEO, specifically for Atari, actually do? Like, what is your day-to-day as the CEO of Atari?
Yeah, so, I think the first thing, because I pretty much live on airplanes now, is I wake up and try to remember which state or country I'm in. So I kind of look around and I'm like, all right, today I'm in LA, or today I'm in New York, or today I'm in Paris. So first thing, I kind of get a grasp of where I am, and then, live and die by my calendar. So open that up. Whatever's in there is what's pretty much going to happen, because that's always been sort of figured out in advance, and I've set that up usually weeks in advance. So you're pretty much running through the gauntlet every day. But I think the interesting thing about being a CEO is people assume that you spend your day telling people what to do, or making a lot of decisions. And the reality, yes, sometimes you do have to make decisions, and sometimes those things happen. But I have this personal belief that the more decisions you have to make and the more things that have to roll up to you, the more your company's failing. So, we have this mantra that I've really tried to hit home of no more heroes, which, there's the game title too. And so that helps, it's catchy, but the concept is that anytime you have to step in and be a hero, or weigh in, or that the company needs to function, that needs me in order to function normally, that's a failure point. That's a failure of my job as the CEO. So most of my time it's checking in with people, making sure that the people that report directly to me are doing all right, that they're in a good place mentally, emotionally, physically, pushing forward the projects that I own, and getting to do cool interviews like this, and trying to keep the wheels on the bus.
This is kind of a cool year for Atari at Shacknews. We recently launched our Shacknews Hall of Fame,
yeah,
which recognizes some of the most important contributions to gaming, whether it be companies, people, games themselves. Before Nintendo, when everybody thought of a video game device, they said that like an Atari.
Yeah.
And what is it like to be part of that thing that is so key to the history of gaming?
It's surreal. That's probably the only word. It feels surreal. When you're in the day-to-day grind, it's a company like any other company, and you're setting up operations, and you're making decisions, and you're working with your team. But it always hits me when I have to describe to somebody what I'm doing or where I'm at, and what this awesome opportunity is. And then you see their face, and you're like, oh yeah, wait, I work at Atari. Whoa, that's cool. So it's on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes there's a lot of non-glamorous stuff that you have to do in any company. But it's reflected in everybody else's love and passion and view of this brand. And in a weird way, it's a brand that you referenced Nintendo, which is they're the great, right? But they are so deeply associated with video games. In a weird way, Atari transcends video games, is a part of our pop culture. I don't know if there's any other brands that have transcended their initial starting point and kind of immersed themselves in culture in a way that is beyond the scope of what they originally produced or did. So I think that's the coolest part. And so it's a surreal thing that I'm grateful for all the time.
Atari has evolved so much over the course of decades, whether it was at the forefront or sort of taking a more of a backseat in the history of games. With where Atari is right now, what do you want people to see what do you want people to think when they see or hear the brand Atari?
I think the challenge of that question is that we see and interact with Atari in all these different ways, right? So it's kind of been the big surprise of being able to step into this role is in pop culture, when people see or interact with Atari, I want them to have kind of this nostalgic feeling to it, but also to be very modern and relevant, and for it to appeal to their sense of aesthetic and humor and all the things that they like. And so for it to feel both vintage and of the times. That's really the goal in any of the pop culture things. And one of the most enjoyable parts of this job has been to see how deeply ingrained it is in culture, and how embraced it is and loved it is in pop culture. On the video game side, which is really the other piece of that, you know, when people see it from that side in the video game industry, I want them to see a group of people who are really passionate, who care about what they do, who are doing it because they love games and are trying to make the best Atari games they can. And it doesn't mean just Atari and the classic IP, but Atari in the more holistic sense of, you know, easy to learn, difficult to master, pick up and play style games that could be classic IP, could be new IP, could be reimaginings of those classic IPs, but that the people here care about it, and this is something that they live and breathe, and that they're worthy stewards. That's what I love them in that genre of think, or into that industry to think.
Now, I do want to keep this, you know, Atari based, but I think this is relevant. What's going on with Ziggurat with all this? Because now you're a CEO of another company. Is that like hands off now? You hand it off to somebody else?
I know. Well, so Ziggurat it is an amazing company. And that was a decision when I stepped into Atari. I really had to go hands off with Ziggurat. So I'm not a part of the management of Ziggurat. You know, we watch closely what they're doing and working on, and there, you know, who knows, there could be ways to collaborate in the future. But I think what's cool about what we did at Ziggurat was it has laid the groundwork for some of what we're doing here, which is looking at a lot of classic old IP, or just even classic IP. I shouldn't say always old, but like, and trying to figure out, you know, triage of that and say, what are we going to re-release? What are we going to remaster? What are we going to remake? And what are we going to reimagine? And putting that process in place so that it's not this thing that you have to build every time you want to do it, but it's a replicatable, sustainable system. And that's the real beauty from Ziggurat. Is so there's a lot of learnings from that company which have come over to Atari, and is what's more retro and vintage than Atari. Nothing.
Was that hard for you to make that decision personally? Because that is kind of like your baby, right? Like it's your company.
I appreciate you asking that. No one's, you know, like, it was terrible. It was terrible. I like devote, and it's fun for me to watch it because they're doing a lot of cool, interesting things. But, you know, it's a very different thing. One's a private company, and you can move fast and break things, and you know, you're really only responsible for a very small select group of stakeholders. The other's a publicly traded company with 50 years of history. So, you know, what you do is scrutinized a lot more heavily. You have to bear in mind the stakeholders of a lot more people, not just your shareholders, but your fans and the people who've cared about the brand and continue to care about the brand. And so I'd say it was hard to leave. It was also, you know, a challenge it was like a pretty big, immediate step up in terms of complexity and legacy.
What do you feel needed preserving, and what needed to evolve for Atari to survive in its current state?
Yeah, so I mean, the most obvious thing that we want to preserve is that love that people have for it. You know, we can call it nostalgia, but it's probably something more than that. You know, it's this love, and it's this thing that makes the brand, even all these years later, one of the most iconic, recognizable, appealing brands in the world. And so preserving that, finding a way so that could come out in media in a more interesting way, finding a way for people to interact with that in ways outside of games. That was something that we wanted to preserve. I think what we felt needed to change was mostly on the game side. And that was really a return to the type of gaming that people associate with Atari. It's hard to have a brand that, and I think one of the things over the decades that was really difficult, not just our most recent decade, but even before that, when Atari was a more prominent label in the world, it was doing everything. Sometimes when you do everything, you do nothing. You publish every game, you're really not publishing anything. It's tough for people to say what that is. And so what we wanted to change is to step back and really say, okay, what does it mean to publish? What does it mean to play an Atari game? And what can we put that out? And that is also something that we're preserving, because it was really a return to what made Atari great in the beginning. I know I said it earlier, but that easy to learn, difficult to master, accessible, joyful, collaborative, connective gameplay we wanted to return to that and preserve that. And that's been a big part of our return to premium gaming and to putting out games that I think if somebody plays those, it's like, yes, this is an Atari game. Like if you've ever, like the new Common Era that we put out, it's a new IP, but in a way it could have maybe been on the 2600 at its core. It's a very simple game, as great of a game as it is. And so trying to, in an age of like ever expanding complexity, when like the last thing we want is more things on our calendar to do. And like, we all have like laundry lists of games to play and just like these creeping responsibilities. I think there's a desire for that simplicity. I think there's a desire just for something you can just pick up and play immediately, even if that's for 15, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever that is, and just jump in and really enjoy yourself. And that's so it was both an evolution, it was an evolution to return to something that we did really well in the past.
And like, I've been doing this game journalist thing for so long. I remember, like you said, when Atari was publishing, and I've seen them go back and forth with different ideas. And like you said, they do a little bit of everything. And this isn't a knock on Atari, but people try new things, and sometimes those things don't pan out, but you don't know until you try, right? You can do your research and look at estimates and just try it. I mean, you guys at one point were in contracts to do gambling machines at one point and making a hotel. I'm not even sure if the hotel is still happening. Is the hotel still happening?
Well, I mean, so we have partners for that.
Okay.
And GST is our partner. They're a really professional group. We work with them pretty closely. As far, that's something that they would have to speak to. But yeah, I mean, we would love to have that. It's a pretty amazing project, and they've done a lot of great work on it. It just take a really long time, and I think COVID's always a difficult time for hotel projects. But that said, with the changing environment and the world going back to normal, I know that that's still absolutely something that we would like to see happen.
See, that's another misconception, I think, in a CEO's role. There's a ton of stuff going on that sometimes you're hands off on it. It's a completely separate partnership and person in charge of the project. And that was already happening before you even came on. That was already in the works when you came on Atari.
Yeah, no, that had been in the works long before I came on. And that was one of the pleasant surprises. It came on, I didn't really know what the state of this was or the partners we had on that. And I got to meet the people over at GST, and just fantastic partners. And I was like, wow, this is real. This could really be something. So that was one of those pleasant surprises. You did bring up, and I didn't mention that at the beginning, but you're right. I think that's one of the misconceptions is it's impossible. I mean, for a company to scale and grow, it's impossible for you to do everything, or for all decisions to roll up to you, which is why, most of my job is enabling other people to be successful at their jobs. And, there are certain things like the financial performance of the company that of course I'm going to bear the responsibility of that, and I work really actively in that. But most of what we do, it's making sure that other talented and highly capable people can be successful at what they need to do. And if that comes to me and I end up having to do it, that would be a failure point in the organization.
No, and I said this is still relevant to Atari, but with your old job as CEO at Ziggurat, you were taking old games and remastering them, re-releasing them.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to try, now that you're a CEO of Atari, a much bigger company with much more finances and more money exchanging hands, is that going to open up more for you to do? Like, are you able to expand your idea from that original company and take it into Atari? I'm sure that's partly by the reason you were hired as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's kind of already happened. I mean, the recharge line, it's more than a remaster, right? Because we're not just, but the recharge line is a big part of that is taking these original IPs, expanding on the initial concept, but hewing close to the initial joy and gameplay, and then adding 2-player simultaneous, leaderboard, trophy support, power-ups, just general things without changing the actual ethos. I would put that almost somewhere between like a remaster and a reimagining category. So that was probably those were the first big projects that when I came on board, that greenlighting and moving more of those through that we put in place. They're also the first games we've released because they're the games with tighter scopes. You can get those out in tighter amounts of time. As time goes on, you're going to see more remasters and remakes and more extensive projects from us. They just take longer. And if when you step in, if those aren't in the pipeline, you have to put them in the pipeline, but they're not going to release for 18 months, 24 months oftentimes. So it's an exciting year for us coming. And absolutely, that's a big part of our upcoming roadmap.
Like the entire core of Ziggurat, I remember just when Ziggurat Interactive was announced, the whole idea was this company that wanted to make these games that aren't like either DOS games or Atari games or any other games that are just no longer playable in a modern form, available on Steam and on other platforms where people can finally re-explore them again. And then you have this job at Atari. Does it ever feel daunting, like entering into one of the most iconic names in classic gaming history and being able to take that in your hands?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really daunting, especially because everybody has an idea of what we should do, and everybody's invested in it. Not just not just the shows, but the fans and the people who've been playing Atari for a long time. So it is daunting. It is daunting because it's a pretty big hill to climb, and there's a lot to do. But everybody also has really strong opinions and thoughts about what you should do and how you should do it. I think the way we tackle that, though, is the team leans pretty heavily on each other, and we try hard internally to make sure that we're clear about where we're going and what we want to do and what we want to build. And we do the best we can when we can to communicate that to all the fans of the brand. But it's a pretty daunting. I think no matter how many companies you've run or been involved with or what you've done in business, being the steward of that iconic of a brand, that means that much to people. If you were to say that it's not daunting, that would be scary. That would be, it should be daunting. That's a lot of there's a lot of love that you're now responsible for. And so we don't take it lightly. We take it really seriously.
Obviously there are a lot of younger CEOs when they have their own startups or they blow up in their tech world or whatever not, but you're relatively young. You're our age, you're mid-30s and you're in charge of this huge IP that has had multi-million-dollar projects over the past 20 years. Is there any pressure when you come into something like that as a cool gaming guy? Because the CEO of Devolver Digital is exactly the same way. He's a really laid-back guy, just trying to do his best. And
yeah,
it's that disconnect that you see when you see the business suit and them coming out of their limousines. It's not like that with you guys. You guys are a little more down to earth, more street level.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the one belief I have is it's only worth it if you enjoy it. I really do believe that. So at the end of the day, I love this stuff. And so that helps a lot, if this was an industry that I didn't feel comfortable in, or I didn't actively game, and I didn't really have a passion for, I think it would be a lot harder and it'd be a lot more daunting. I mean, I still feel that pressure and I still have those feelings, but it's probably more excitement than nervousness. It's more oh wow, this is the opportunity. How amazing is it to be able to be the steward of Atari and to try and bring it back into a place, to find a place for it. It deserves to be, it has its place in pop culture. It deserves to have its place in video games, and to go find that and to articulate that and to bring that into the world. So it's pressure, but it's also pretty dreamlike oftentimes, just given this is, I feel like a lot of things in my life, this is the confluence of all of those experiences.
And like you said at the beginning, you're doing a ton of traveling. You said you're always on planes. Even pre-pandemic, it seems that a lot of CEOs do that all the time. But we live in a digital age. Is there a specific reason that you have to go see face-to-face with these partners, these meetings? You can't do it digitally? Is there a code of ethics that I haven't heard of? I'm not a CEO, so I don't know.
No. I mean, oh man, wow. And we do a lot remotely, right? We're talking all the time remotely. But I think what actually happened is, as we move out of the pandemic allowed people to become more remote and to spread out more, and the organization became more decentralized, more virtual. And as a result, and 90% of the time that's fine, but you still need occasionally to meet up. You need to get everybody into a room to, when everybody's doing their day-to-day work and pushing their projects forward, it's really not a problem. But when you're trying to come together, you're trying to agree on what that high-level strategy is going to be, or you're working through your annual audit, or you're trying to communicate to the team, why you're doing what you're doing and the real values and meaning behind it. it is more impactful when you're in person. And so as people have become more disparate, there's also a need to travel more, to occasionally to meet up. And then for some partners, there's just hubs. There's also, that's the interesting part about this industry. All industries have kind of like hubs where a lot of things happen. There's various hubs where a lot of things happen. LA, obviously it's media and game development, SF as well. Minneapolis for distribution. New York is where we're headquartered. And then we're technically based out of Paris. And so we have to spend time there just as a public traded company. So naturally, these different ecosystems will kind of pull you in for events or a specific singular thing. What doesn't happen as much is just traveling for the sake of traveling. Usually there's a definite reason why I end up in those places now.
I have to say, I used to work at you may know of Twin Galaxies. If I know of anything about if I know anything from that experience, is that classic games companies like Atari have some very, very passionate older fans that are very particular about their games. Yeah. And I want to know, have you been in contact with any Twin Galaxies record holders, any particular faces from the old days, or has there been any pressure for a certain direction with Atari or its games?
Yeah, so we have been in contact with a lot of the old creators, engineers, a lot of the old what people would consider the quintessential Atari veterans. I would love it. I probably need to wait and not share all of those because some of those are going to be surprises that'll be revealed throughout the year, and they're definitely fitting into some of our plans throughout the year. What's been pretty surprising is how willing people have been to talk with us, work with us. I think I didn't know really what that would look like, whether they would want to have anything to do with us, but I think there has been people have been easy to work with and willing to help and willing to step in and work on new projects or pick up old projects. And so it's been cool. It's been really cool. And so that's going to continue. And we do quite a bit. And that's one of those things that it's really important to us that we reestablish. So short answer, yes. And lots more to come.
Going back to kind of the pressure question, as a kind of divergent from that, what was it like stepping into this role? Because before Ziggurat Interactive, you were EVP, of course, but you were kind of in your own enclosed little bubble. People didn't bug you, they didn't write about you. Then all of a sudden you step to CEO, and there's a million speculation articles about you. Your pictures everywhere. People are saying, how rich is Wade Rosen? How much stock does he have? It's just is that intimidating? Because from the outside, I feel a lot of people want that attention, but when they get it, it's kind of jarring.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that you can't prepare for until you're in. That's a really good example of that. I would say I was not prepared for it in the sense that I didn't expect it to be that, you don't expect all of a sudden somebody else to claim they're the CEO randomly one day. And then you're like, well, guess the rest of my week is devoted to handling this news outcry here, on whether you're the CEO or not. Nothing's going to prepare you for that. Nothing's going to prepare you for some of the the outrageousness of the role. The public stuff, I like some of it. I think the personal aspects are hard, but I also try to use it as an opportunity for growth and just say okay, I guess that I wasn't expecting it, but it's obviously not something I can change. So what does that mean? What does that mean to be in a position where people are going to ask those questions and want that information? And what's the strategy in which we provide it to them? So there's not, with some things shouldn't are not a part of that discussion, but that there's not a lot of speculation around it. So it was pretty jarring at first, but I tried to adapt and become more comfortable with it as time's gone on.
Well, it's also got to be hard too with social media being a front, because when you, you're small, you can type stuff and say little stupid things, and when you're a CEO of a company, Elon Musk says something, the stock plummets, then it raises, then it plummets, or you can get indicted for some of this stuff if you tweet out something like a cool game's coming out soon. Oh, you can't say that. That violates this section of this. Now you're gonna be fined, and that's the kind of business mind that I'm into sometimes. That's insane that you have to deal with that all the time.
Yeah, and that's that's just like, you have to get into it and learn it, and have good advisors and good legal experts around you. I'm not very active on social media, kind of for that reason. I probably should be, and that's right now. We've really been just focused on rebuilding the company and putting in organizational structure and repeatable processes and getting projects in the works. But eventually I'll probably have to cross that bridge, and you're right. It's not something you can just like go fire up on Friday night and like type out some funny stuff. You're like, okay, run it through PR, make sure they're okay with this.
Like through the publicists, got to prove it. Yeah. It's kind of like a hassle. It's kind of sad because I feel like your life is your personal life, but if you want to express that, it's so much more complicated for you now.
Yeah. You have to find other ways. Yeah. They're like, if you let it can feel inauthentic at times. That's maybe, you have to find different ways to express your authenticity, right? Through art or other creative forms, or actually, like, for a big one for me is just being involved in the creation of these new games and the games we're working on. That's been, a pretty meaningful creative outlet for me. And it's not my full-time job, and it's not even anything that I can do spending like a large amount of my time, but I kind of view it as something that feeds me, being able to work on, because we have IP that's iconic and world-renowned, in many ways transcends the actual games in which it's based. But we don't have a lot of characters. We don't have a lot of plots or narratives. And so as we, in some situations, set out to create those, it's really fun to be a part of that. And that's, so you find ways to express yourself that maybe isn't as Wade, but is like through a narrative that's now part of a game that you're collectively putting out.
I'm curious to know, because of the long history of Atari and the many faces and hands that have been through the company, if you could tap some of the designers program, and you mentioned that you may have something to reveal later this year, so you don't have to spoil anything, but this is sort of like a dream scenario.
Yeah.
If you could tap some of the designers, programmers, and executives who have worked with Atari through the decades, who would you choose? And were there any in particular that inspired your approach to the current Atari?
So if it's a name that we're probably talking to them from the golden age of games, in one way or another. And I want to avoid saying which ones I'd want to work with most, because there will be a lot of like reveals and
yeah, we just talked about that. Yeah, you can't say what you're excited about.
But we are working. But this is like a thin line I have to tread here, right? It just goes back to that previous question. So there will be more coming out about that. I think there are a lot of, we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people that came before us, and the projects that we do with them show that. And I think that'll be revealed in the future. I do also think, just from the industry as a whole, even beyond Atari, there's a lot of great companies out there that have done really cool, interesting things. And, when we look at them in the market, it's, I don't want to say we take a page, but we find inspiration in what they've done and what they're continuing to do.
I mean, the other questions I have are just like funny, silly questions, because you're such a cool guy. Just like, so do you have a handler now that helps you go everywhere and tells you where to go, where you're going to be, and all that stuff?
Oh, I don't, but I should. That's why I wake up in the morning, I'm like, that's my day. Okay, great.
You handle yourself.
It is a team effort. Like David, on all the, who's on the call right now with all the PR stuff, is phenomenal and really helps keep me, so that I'm walking in prepped and ready, and helps to push those things forward. And I think that's the biggest change in the last 12 months is it's a team. There's a team of people here that are professionals that care and care about the company, care about each other, care about games. And we all can kind of lean into what we do best. And I didn't mean to cut off your question earlier about like my journey to here. And if you had any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those.
Oh, no, I just think you've done so much. Like your hands have been in kind of all over the place, which is good because you learn so much from that experience when you jump around to different sections of business.
Do you mind if I speak to that for a second, Greg?
Yeah, actually, of
course. I hadn't thought about that until you brought it up in that way, but there was a reason why I didn't go into video games when I was younger, which was because when I was really young, I thought about being a writer, and I looked around and I was like, oh wow, all these writers are miserable. They're all, they're all just like depressed, or they're alcoholics, or they're like, I'm like, oh, what's this about? And And somebody at the time kind of gave me some advice, which was like, okay, separate your professional life from what you're passionate about, which is not usually the advice you give people. They're like, because if you're not careful, what you do every day could kill what you're passionate about. So I intentionally didn't go into games or writing or things like that for that matter, because I didn't want to destroy this passion that I had. So I was able to learn and build skills in industries that they were fun and interesting, and I'm like really grateful for that time. But wasn't something, I don't have books lining my shelf on like HR benefits. I mean, it was great to solve those problems, and I learned a lot. Games was always that thing that I could turn to, and it was, just this like constant in my life. There's this like really beautiful constant. And at a certain point in time, I remember one day being like, wait a minute, maybe it won't. Maybe I can do this, and it won't destroy this thing that I care so much about, that I'm passionate about. And that was when I decided to start Ziggurat and got involved with Ziggurat. And that was an active decision. And then that's led here to Atari. So I think it's different, because most people start in the industry when they're really young and just working it for a long time. And for me, I've come in later, and that's a disadvantage, but it can be advantageous, because you can come in with fresh ideas, you can view things with a fresh perspective, and you can view it from a lens of traditional tech or from biotech or healthcare. And it's not always applicable, but there's little things that you can apply and view in innovative ways as a result.
Yeah, I've seen that when we spoke to you about Ziggurat Games in our last interview a few years ago. I remember you were always very level-minded. I really want to do this game, but I know it's only going to sell 5 copies. So let's not do that. Like even though I really want to, and it's a quote, I think it's the greatest game in the world. Let's not do it. Let's do this.
Or maybe we'll just re-release that one.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we'll just put that one out on Steam. We won't do the whole kid and caboodle. Yeah.
So you have that really good mindset when you look at something, and I'm sure that will bring so much to the Atari brand, as well as games that are coming out, whether they're remasters, releases, reimaginings. So I really look forward to seeing you grow and being a good CEO.
So, we'll see how it works out, right? Fingers crossed here. Yeah.